One of the dreams that Paro had was there were seven sheaves on one stalk. Shiva shibolim olim b'kone echod, kone echod on one stalk. So the Baal Tum says, where do we find that expression kone echod? When we speak about the menorah, what was the menorah? The menorah had 7 lights on it, but the menorah was only the center. The center vertical post, that was called the menorah. The ones that came out from the sides, they were called kinei menorah. They were the branches of the menorah, but the menorah was the center one. It says, and he uses the term kone echod. We find kone echod regarding the menorah. We find kone echod regarding Paro's dream. 7 sheaves growing on one kone. So he says, the Balaturim, that just as the menorah, its value was illumination, it illuminated. When there's plenty in the world, which that's what the 7 sheaves on one stalk represented, the world is illuminated. When there's blessing, there's bracha, and there's plenty, and people have, there's no envy, the world shines. So that's the common denominator between the kone of the menorah, kone echod, and kone echod in regard to the one stalk which had the 7 sheaves on it. That's all he says, the point. I'd once mentioned, the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos that as the nights get longer, which means as we get closer to winter, which nights get longer, one has an obligation to increase his Torah study. Why do you have an obligation to increase your Torah study? Because the Gemara tells us, why did Hashem create night? Lo ivri leilo el girsa. Hashem created nighttime for people to study Torah. During the daytime, that you're able to be involved in the physical productivity, people are involved. Agriculture, society, you're out in the field, you're busy with the animals. Night comes, everything comes to a halt. So why does Hashem want things to come to a halt? Otherwise, people would work even beyond that capacity. Because Hashem, lo ivri leila elo legirsa. Either you go to sleep or you study Torah. So when we speak about the quantity of Torah that's studied in the world, when do you have more Torah studied? In the winter months or in the spring or summer months? In the winter months. That's when you have more Torah studied. Now, the Gemara in Tainis cites many psukim that the Torah is considered as water. We learn that one only has a capacity to retain the Torah if you have humility. Why? Because just as Torah is compared to water, and water flows from an elevated location to a low location, identically, Torah could only be acquired or only be contained in the person who has a humble spirit. If you're humble, the Torah can be contained. That's a characteristic of water. Or just as Torah itself, it quenches your thirst if one is parched. Identically, the Torah also quenches one's spiritual needs. That's the question of water and Torah itself. So what water is to the physical, that's what Torah is to the spiritual. That's what it is. It has all its characteristics. Now, one of the main rains which provide enough hydration for the world that you should have crops in the spring and the summer. The bracha of the spring and summer is dependent on the winter rains. If it rains sufficiently in the winter, then you have bracha in the spring and the summer, because the world is hydrated. The agriculture is hydrated. So we find that there's a common denominator between the spiritual water, the spiritual sustenance, the Torah, that we have a greater degree of Torah in the winter, because the nights are longer, and Hashem created night specific for that purpose, and the winter rains are in the winter. So we find there's the equation between the Torah study and the rain. So it's similar to what the Baal Torah is pointing out. We find Kone Echad, everything was on that vertical post, because the others were called the branches of the menorah. But the menorah was the Kone Echad, was the center stalk. That's what it was, the center shaft. And Kone Echad, which is speaking about the plenty in Egypt, is Kone Echad, that the 7 sheaves, which represented the ultimate level of plenty to the world, was also konei echad. Just to elucidate what Balaturim, what this alludes to. This word of the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos, Mein Kemach Ein Torah. We live in the physical world, so one has to take out time to provide material. Because Mein Kemach Ein Torah, if there's no flour, there's no bread, there's no Torah. One is dependent on the other. But the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, in Mein Kemach Ein Torah, but in Mein Torah Ein Kemach. But if you don't study Torah, Hashem, that's similar, withholds the what? Withholds the Kemach. If you study Torah, Hashem provides the Kemach. If you don't study Torah, then Hashem withholds the Kemach. In Mein Torah Ein Kemach. So the Orach Chaim HaKodesh explains it slightly different. He says, Im Ein Kemach, Ein Torah. If Hashem is not providing the sustenance, the material sustenance, that's an indicator that the Torah is not at its appropriate level. Because if the Torah would be at its appropriate level, Hashem would provide the Kemach. So Ein Kemach, that's a confirmation, Ein Torah. There's a problem with the Torah, because if the Torah would be at the level that it should be, Hashem would provide the Kemach. So we find the same concept. One is contingent on the other. That if the Torah is sufficient, then the material is sufficient. If the Torah is deficient, then Hashem withholds the sustenance. And this is really the discussion in Brochos between Reb Shimon Yochai and Reb Shmuel. Reb Shimon Yochai says that if a person would be involved in the agricultural responsibilities of a farmer, you'd plow when in the plowing season, and you would sow in the sowing season, reap, and so on and so forth. Reb Shimon Yochai says, Torah mateo leo. What's going to be with Torah? You're busy in the physical. So he says, how does it work? That if a Jew is involved in Torah at the level that he should be, Hashem will provide others. You'll be able to delegate it through the non-Jew, and one doesn't have to interrupt his Torah study. And that it says, the second paragraph of the Shema, if you follow my mitzvos, love them chol nafshchem, that's speaking where a person is not fully dedicated. He's not sufficiently dedicated. And if you're not sufficiently dedicated, then you have to do your own bidding. Hashem will not allow it to come through others. You'll have to interrupt your Torah study for that reason. So how do we understand? How we're saying, talking about a person is totally dedicated. So why is that considered inosa ritzon shel makom? He's not doing the will of God. So we explained it based on the Medrash Chuma. In Parshas Noach, we find in the first paragraph of the Shema, it says, Chol levavcha, chol nafshcho ma'odecho. It mentions one's material, one's comforts. You serve out, you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your money, all your possessions. That means you're even willing to forego the life's comforts for the sake of Torah. The second paragraph doesn't mention chol ma'odechem, chol ma'odchem, chol levavcha, nafshchem. So we're speaking about a Jew who's not willing to forego the pleasures of life for the sake of Torah. That's considered enos road to shalom. If a person is willing to give it all up for Hashem, Hashem will fully provide. That you'll be able to delegate it through others, and others be interested in what? In accommodating whatever your needs may be. But the second paragraph, because you're not willing to forego the amenities of life, the pleasures of life, then you have to do your own bidding. Hashem will not allow that it should come that easy. Not only that, you may even have to give up your Torah study at the time to work for others, even for non-Jews. Okay, but it's the same idea. If you dedicate fully for the spiritual, Hashem will provide the material. But you compromise on the spiritual, then Hashem will compromise on what He provides, and therefore you have to take out time to provide for yourself. We find that in Parshas Zosa Barocha, right after he gives the bracha to Ruvain, Moshe Rabbeinu gives the bracha to Yehuda. V'zos Yehuda vayomar. So Rashi over there cites the Midrash. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu mention Yehuda right after Ruvain? Zos Yehuda Vayomar. So he explains that Ruvain forfeited the birthright and the kuna because he had switched Yaakov's bed from the tent of Bilhah to the tent of Leah, his mother, without consulting with his father. And because of that, because he had this characteristic of being impulsive, he says you're not qualified not to be the king and not to be the Kohen. So the kingship went to Yehuda, and the officiant to serve Hashem went to Levi as a result of that. We read about the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Tamar was found out she was pregnant, and Yehuda gives a ruling. She has to be put to death through burning. And then she sends a message, this encrypted message to Yehuda. I was impregnated by the man who gave me his signet ring, his walking staff, and his covering, his blanket. So what did Yehuda do? Immediately, he openly admitted, Tzodkini Meni, she's more righteous than I am, because I did not give her to my youngest son, Shelah. When Yehuda did that, what did he do? He publicly embarrassed himself. He made it public knowledge that he was the one who impregnated Tamar. When he made that statement, you know what happened? Yaakov never knew who switched his bed. Never knew it. Reuven then came forth and says, I'm the one who switched the bed. So why did Reuven do tshuva and openly admit that he was the culprit, so to say? Because Yehuda went and he openly said, admitted publicly, despite the embarrassment, that he impregnated Tamar. That's why the Torah over there, Moshe juxtaposes the blessing of Yehuda to Reuven. Why? Because the Gemara tells us in Sota that Yehuda had made a commitment to his father. Because Yaakov was concerned that Binyamin, that just as Rachel passed away on as they were traveling, Binyamin taking him on the road, he also may pass away. So Yehuda gave a guarantee that he would bring him back. Who will bring him back? And what was the guarantee? If I don't bring him back, not only am I willing to forfeit my share in the physical world, I'm even willing to forfeit my share in the spiritual world. I will be a cherub. I'll be excommunicated in the spiritual world. What happened? As we read this week's Parsha, he did bring him back. As a result of this contentious going back and forth, Yosef admitted that he was Yosef, and Binyamin was released. Okay? But the Gemara tells us that if a person enters into a cherem, accept excommunication on himself, even on a condition, and even if you meet the condition, since when you made that, you accepted upon yourself, it wasn't clear that you'd be able to fulfill it, because Yehuda says, I'm willing to turn the world upside down to give you the guarantee, but Yehuda didn't know. Didn't know what the outcome would be. As a result of that, the cherem takes effect. So after Yehuda passed away, he was excommunicated from the spiritual world. And his neshama did not go to the world to come. He was not admitted in Yeshiva Shel Mala, in the Heavenly Torah Academy. All the 40 years they were in the desert. It says that, even before, it says Yehuda's remains were shaking all those years because he was not admitted in Yeshiva Shel Mala. Until Moshe Rabbeinu was mispal for him that he should be reinstated. Why? In what schus? That since the only reason why Reuven did tshuva fully and openly admitted that he was the culprit who switched the bed, which Yaakov was not aware until that moment, when Yehuda openly admitted that he impregnated Tamar, that's the reason why Reuven openly admitted that he was the one. His tshuva was a complete tshuva. So that merit that he caused Reuven to do tshuva, Yehuda deserves to be reinstated in the Yeshiva Shel Mala, the Heavenly Torah Academy. That's the Gemara. Okay. So what do we see over here? That bringing a person to tshuva has such great value. Yehuda, as great as he was, but now that Moshe is supplicating that his schus, his merits, they brought Reuven to tshuva, that's sufficient to bring him reinstating Yeshiva Shel Mala. You see, it's unbelievable what the power of causing another person to do tshuva. Okay, leave it there now. we had said, why did Yaakov's children have to bow to Yosef? Because Yaakov was insensitive to Rachel, but she had no children, and she says, if you don't give me a child, I will die. Says Yaakov became angry at her. So because it was considered not acceptable, because Hashem says that's the way you speak to a distressed woman. I swear on your life, your children will bow to hers. So the whole scenario of the what came about due to what? It came about because Yaakov was insensitive. Okay, now Yehuda, what happened after Yosef was sold into slavery? Yehuda fell out of favor of his brothers because they saw the way his father was grieving. If Yehuda would have said, return him, Yosef returned, but Yosef would have never been sold as a slave. Yehuda was the cause of whatever happens now with Binyamin was because Yehuda gave the decision to sell Yosef into slavery. So ultimately, why did Yehuda have to accept upon himself this level of responsibility that if he doesn't return Binyamin, he's going to be excommunicated, even in the world to come? Because Yosef was sold as a slave, and ultimately he became the viceroy. That's the whole story happened there. So factually, Yehuda was responsible for what happened right now. Binyamin now is being taken captive because how did all this evolve? What's the background? Because Yehuda gave the decision, sell him to slavery, take him out of the pit, sell him to slavery, ultimately became viceroy, the whole story. And now, being in that position, he wants that the dream should come to fruition. Therefore, he needs Binyamin there. He wants his father even to come. But that he couldn't deliver that. Because he felt Yehuda would kill him as a result of that. But ultimately, the whole story why he was excommunicated from Yeshiva Shel Malo, he brought this upon himself. Nevertheless, as I said, the power of tshuva, that due to him, he brought Reuven back to tshuva, regardless how badly you fail, that's sufficient to have you reinstated into the world to come, into the ultimate level of Yeshiva Shel Malo. That's the point. Yigash loved Yehuda. So after he comes up with this whole constructed this, finding Binyamin guilty of stealing the goblet of the viceroy, and Yosef now wants to retain him as a slave. And Yehuda realized this whole thing was what? Was a cabal? Was a setup? Yehuda will not tolerate this. And Yehuda is going to defend his position to prove that Binyamin is innocent. He goes and recounts everything from the first day they met, the first moment they met, how we asked certain questions, and all this was only to lead to this point. V'yigash love Yehuda. Yehuda approaches him. The words approach has many levels of connotation. Approach him meant in a way with the greatest level of respect, or approach includes with it simultaneously. This is something which Yehuda will not tolerate. He was ready for war. Yehuda was ready to go to war. And we'll see, the Medrash tells us that Yehuda had the ability that he personally could destroy 3/4 of Egypt himself. Together with the other brothers, they could destroy Egypt. And when he would reach a certain level of anger, what would happen? He would take metal, put it in his mouth. He could chew it up, and it would turn into iron ore. He would, all of a sudden, a droplet of blood would drip from an eye, and he had hair on his chest. The hair would pierce his clothing. That was an indication Yehuda is ready to explode. And Yosef knew this. When Yosef saw that during this dialogue back and forth, he realized he better reveal that he's Yosef, otherwise he's going to be killed. And if he's killed, there's no future. That's the only reason why Yosef revealed himself, and he says, "Ani Yosef Avichai." But it all happened as a result of this dialogue that Yehuda is painting such a picture so bleak and so bad about this man is a monster. He says, I fear God, I'm compassionate, I'm giving, and he shows him that all this is a ploy only to do whatever is. because he wants Binyamin, because Binyamin was beautiful also, to what? That he should want to sodomize him. That's what Judah believed, not knowing that this is Yosef. Rashi says, Yikonsu dvare boznecha, meaning he wants to be fully attentive to what I'm saying. Yidabeno avdecho dover bozne adoni, please my master. Allow my words to enter into the ears of my master. Val yichar abcha bavdecho, and don't be angered at your servant. He's calling himself a servant because what he's going to say now is going to really ruffle Yosef's feathers. As gentle and as respectful he will be, but he's accusing Yosef of the most vile type of crime here. So the symbol means I honor you, I revere you as Paro, or just as Paro took my grandmother and tried to commit adultery, to rape her in times of Avram, you're taking my brother to commit this act of sodomy. And just as with Sori Menu, what happened when Paro attempted to touch her? It says he was smitten with all kinds of plagues. Identically, if you attempt to touch our brother, you're going to be smitten the same way. That's Ki Chomocha for Paro. You're no different than the Paro. Or just as Paro, if you'd be Paro, I would kill you. I would kill Paro, I will kill you just in the same way. So these were illusions. You know, if you read between the lines, that's what Judah was communicating to Yosef. That's a simple understanding. Ultimately, you're going to be smitten with leprosy. Sora he withheld of one night from Avram Avinu. It says he was smitten with a plague. Over there, it doesn't describe what it was. Rashi over here cites in the Medrash it was leprosy. As Paro decrees and he does not fulfill what he promises, meaning you're a liar. You're not to be trusted. Is this you just want bring your brother? I just want to look at him. I want to see if what you're saying is true. He says, don't anger me. Because if I have to, I will kill you and your master. You're no different than your master, I will kill you all. Now you understand why he predicated his words. He says, don't become incensed, angered at me. Because even though the words can be interpreted as the most respectful, but if you read between the lines, he was communicating something very, very extreme. If Yosef or this viceroy would hold his brother. Now he goes and now he paints the whole picture by recounting everything from the first moment. Adoni Shoal Avod of Lamor, as Adon of Lamor. My master originally asked his servant, saying, do you have a father? Do you have a brother? The first time they met. But no and we shared the information. So Rashi says, look, we're not interested in getting involved in the shidduch here. You know, you're checking out our pedigree. Do you have a father? Do you have a brother? But we were honest with you, and we openly revealed to you information which had no relevance to the whole discussion. We have an elderly father, an old father, and a child who was born to him in his old age. His brother died. He was the only child left to his mother. And his father loves him. Now, if you take a look at the word Zekunim here, it's written as it says, Ben Zekunim lo by Yosef. He was the Ben Zekunim. It's written with the Vav is deleted, right? It's not written in its full spelling. So one interpretation over there was Ben Zekanim, right? Meaning Yaakov had transmitted to Yosef all the Torah that he learned in Shem Ve'ever, That was that Torah to deal with exile for the survival of the Jewish people. That same Torah, the Torah says over here, he had shared with only Binyamin. Because Binyamin being the son of Rachel, they contend with the Golus, with exile. Okay? Ochiv Mes, factually, Yehuda said something which wasn't true. It wasn't Ochiv Mes. Because he was afraid, therefore he said something which was not true. If I say that he's alive, he'll tell me, bring him to validate and prove that you're honest. He's the surviving child of that mother. We're not of the same mother. He said to you, sir, bring him down. I just want my eye to come upon him, just to verify whether your people are truthful. And we said to you that the lad cannot leave his father because they're so connected to one another, and the father's old. If he leaves his father may die. And you said it doesn't make a difference. You must bring him. So he's already showing him his level of insensitivity. Here he claims he's this compassionate person, and yet we explained to you that it may put our father's life in jeopardy. He said it doesn't make a difference. Just bring him here. He said, if you don't bring the youngest brother, I don't want to ever see your face again. Never to see you again. This is how insensitive he is to Yaakov's life. We explained to you our father is so connected, taking his youngest child may put his life in jeopardy. You said it doesn't make a difference. Just bring him. When we ascended to our servant of my father, and we shared with him the words of my master. Okay? So this is the first time he's referring to as Yaakov as the servant of Yosef, of the viceroy. We see over here because Yehuda ben said, referred to Yaakov as Avdecha 10 times. Every time that he mentioned Avdecha, and Yosef did not divulge immediately that he's Yosef, and he allowed this to keep going, he had 10 years of his life taken off. Yosef was meant to live 120 years. He had 10 years deducted for every time he heard Avdecha and remained silent, which was considered the ultimate level of disrespect. He had a year of his life removed. Even though in his mind he justified it because he was pushing the envelope to the nth degree, because he wanted that Yaakov ultimately should also come and bow to him, because that was the dream. But factually, it's unacceptable. So I asked the question last year, 2 years ago, and Mark gave the answer. You remember the question I asked, Mark? I asked the question, I said, Mark tells us in a number of locations that where do we see that if a person assumes exceptional level of pressure, like lordship, that actually it shortens his life. Yosef was from the youngest brothers, and he was the first one to die. He was meant to live 120 years. He lived 110 years because he was the king, and he had this level of responsibility to provide for the world. That pressure actually diminished his health, and that's why he passed away 10 years before his time. So I asked the question. It says here, Chazal said that because he remained silent, when he heard Avdecha Ovig 10 times, every time he heard it, he had a year taken off his life. It's unrelated that because he had this level of pressure. It's like they said, President of the United States, in 4 years, he ages 20 years. Has nothing to do with it. With Yosef, was due to what? Remaining silent. That's the question I asked. So Mark gave the answer what I wanted to say. Do you remember the answer you said? The goblet and the saddlebag of Reuven, of Binyamin, the brothers initially thought maybe he did take it. That the accusation was correct. Why? Because just as his mother, Rachel, took the fetishes of her father, and ultimately that caused, Yaakov said, the one who took it should die. Binyamin is following, he has that characteristic of the mother. And it says when Lavan checked the tents to look for his fetishes, it says he searched the tent of Yaakov and Leah and the concubines. Then it says he went back to search the tent of Rachel. So Rashi over there cites the men. Why do you go back to the tent of Rachel again? The tent of Yaakov was the tent of Rachel. So why did he go back again to the tent of Rachel? So the Medrash says because she was mashmonis. She was the one, she liked to touch many things. See, he was his daughter. She knew exactly what her characteristics were. You know, she likes to touch things. She goes to places where she doesn't belong, so to say. So maybe she went back to check again because he felt she'd be the culprit. That's the about Rachel. So Binyamin had that characteristic. Mash. Because it says she went out to see the daughters of the land. It says just as Leah went out to tell Yaakov that night was given to her by Rachel, which is slightly a compromise in modesty, because a woman doesn't go out and she should be more modest. So Dinah went out, she compromised her modesty by going out to see the daughters of the land. And that's when Shem noticed them, that's why she was raped. So we see the characteristics of the mother carry over to the children. So they thought over here, maybe Binyamin, really, he took the goblet. And they were upset initially with Binyamin for that reason. But now, of course, Yehuda understands the whole thing was what? Was purely a ploy to retain Binyamin, seeing the whole scenario over here, seeing how things unfolded and evolved. I'd ask the question, as I mentioned, Yehuda is saying Binyamin is Ben Zekunim. How many years were there between Yosef and Binyamin? Yosef was born the 14th year that Yaakov was in the working for Lavan. He stayed another 6 years. That means when Yaakov left Lavan, right? Yosef was 6 years old. Rachel passed away on the way, right? He was 2 years on the way. So we're talking about like another year. There was about a 7-year difference between Binyamin and Yosef. That means when Yosef was sold at the age of 17, how old was Binyamin? Maybe 10 years old. And it says over here, he had transmitted all the Torah that he learned Shem Ve'eva to Binyamin because he's Ben Zekunim. So I asked the question, if Yaakov believed that Yosef died, and he believed that the tunic that was saturated in blood was the blood of Yosef, and that's why he grieved, because he felt that, because he had a Masorah, that if any one of his children died in his lifetime, he's going to Gehenna, because he did not meet the objective of creation, was to establish a Jewish people. So if that's the case, why did he teach this Torah? If he taught the Torah to Yosef, because Yosef is going to guarantee the exile, that the Jewish people to survive Mitzrayim to go to Sinai. But once Yosef's not here, there's no Sinai, because Torah is only given to Klal Yisrael. If that's the case, why teach this Torah to Binyamin? That's the question that bothered me. You hear the question? Even though Yaakov may have failed as the Av of Klal Yisrael, that he will not be the father of the Jewish people. There may not be a Sinai, but factually the world is God's world. And the only way you could counter the influences, even for his children, you need a Binyamin. Because that's the only way you could survive. I mean, he still has children. They're his children. It may not be the Jewish people. So he may not achieve the ultimate, but his children have to be able to counter all the influences of the world. How do you counter that? You have to have the Torah of Shem Ve'eva. Binyamin, representing Rachel, being the son of Rachel, he has the capacity to protect the other sons. It's still one family. That was the value of teaching him the Torah of the Zekanim. That's why he was Ben Zekunim for that reason.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, I didn't catch that fully.
Even though Yaakov may have failed as the patriarch of the Jewish people, and there's not going to be a Sinai, right? Now, how do you survive? How does his family? He still has 11 children. How do these 11 sons, how do they counter and deflect the influences of the world? So therefore, Binyamin has, being the son of Rachel, who has that ability to dominate the material, the physical world, he has the capacity to do that. I mean, even there's not going to be a Sinai, there's not going to be a Jewish people. It doesn't make a difference, but it's still his family. And they have to be able to survive despite all the influences of the world. Who will counter that? Binyamin has the Torah that he has that ability to counter it. Binyamin is the Lahava. He's the flame. You still have to counter the Esav. Still have to counter him, those influences.
Right. Yosef is the Lahava.